Welcome to my video on my approach to pregnancy after 4 losses. I am currently 19 weeks pregnant. I had 4 first trimester losses ranging from a chemical pregnancy to a 12-week loss, and then my 5th pregnancy resulted in Elba, and this is my 6th pregnancy. In this video, I'm going to be sharing how I approached pregnancy after recurring losses, my pregnancy with Elba, as well as this pregnancy, in terms of physical choices that I make, maybe the medical choices that I make, as well as my emotional approach and the emotional tools or choices that I make, given that this has been my journey. My huge disclaimer for this video is that I know that the way that I have chosen to approach pregnancy after recurring losses is not the norm. But in this video, I am sharing the raw and the real, and I'm sharing insights from me, who walked the path of 4 consecutive losses right after each other, which meant that my 5th pregnancy was my 5th pregnancy in a 12-month period. I'm gonna share my thoughts, my opinions, my approach, and I kindly ask that if you're watching this video, you allow space for my story too. I say that because I engaged with a lot of pregnancy after loss content. So I had pregnancy after losses and loss content, and there was a lot of it that did not resonate with me. I don't view pregnancy after loss the same as every other person who has experienced pregnancy after loss. After one of my losses, when I was pregnant again, I started reading, which is probably like one of the most common pregnancy after loss books, and I stopped because the things in that book, while I'm sure they were so valuable to so many people, those recommendations weren't ones that I wanted. I didn't want more tests done. I didn't need to advocate for myself, which was large recommendations of those books. I didn't need or want any of that. And in this video, I'm going to explain that. So what I'm kindly asking as my disclaimer is that we allow space for someone who has different views and opinions and a different approach, and know that this video is about me and my journey and what I went through. And I share it because maybe some of it will resonate with other people. Maybe there are also other people out there that don't exactly align with the most commonly approached way to pregnancy after loss. For this video, please just take what serves you and leave what doesn't serve you. And nothing that I share in this video of my experience invalidates anybody else's experience. This is probably the most intense disclaimer I have ever made for any of my videos, but I feel almost nervous to share. And I felt nervous for a long time now, which is why I didn't share earlier. And I'm not nervous about sharing my story. I'm nervous because pregnancy after loss and having a loss, even if you're not pregnant yet, those things are really hard. And I know that there's so much that we can say that can touch on wounds that are still raw. And there's a lot to deal with pregnancy after loss. But I'm going to share my story, and I hope that we can allow space for everybody's different stories and the experiences that they had. The other disclaimer is this video is my approach to pregnancy after loss, which means there's a lot of talk about my losses. There's a lot of very real, very raw details. If that's irksome for you, sorry. That's part of it, and that is helpful for me to explain everything. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about, because I feel that this is something that so many people ask, and I completely understand why. And they ask me, did I do anything differently to not have another loss, to sustain that pregnancy, which brought us Elba? And for this pregnancy, I did not have a first trimester loss prior to this pregnancy. And I can understand that a lot of times we are seeking answers, or we are seeking something that we can do to prevent having more losses. But my answer to the question of whether I did anything differently from a health perspective, no. Not in particular, no. Nothing I did in any of my pregnancies caused those losses. Nothing that I could have done would have saved any of those pregnancies. So there is no medication, there is no supplement, there is no nothing that I could have done that would have sustained those pregnancies doing that in pregnancy. Now, this could be different for somebody else who is having recurring losses due to something like hormonal factors or thyroid factors, but those were not the reasons for my losses. Therefore, there was nothing that I could do in pregnancy that was going to change whether my pregnancy sustained or did not sustain. What I do, however, is that I am very health conscious, and I will continue to take ownership of my health and do everything that I can to be my healthiest self, not just for conception, not just for sustaining pregnancy, but for birth, for having a baby, for breastfeeding, and for parenting. So I'm very health conscious outside of pregnancy. There's nothing that I do differently once I become pregnant. Prior to trying to conceive, we did 3 years of active preconception. I continued through all of my losses to focus on my health, look at ways that my husband and I could both improve our health and our well-being, not just our physical health, but also our environment and our mental health and everything else. We continued to focus on those things, not just with the mindset to conceive, but the mindset of continuously wanting to be our healthiest, best selves. There are things that I do in pregnancy that people who have had losses may do because they've had losses, but I do them simply because they believe they are supportive, and I did them even before I had a loss. So an example of this is that I take bioidentical progesterone. I took that in my luteal phase when we were doing preconception, and I did that through all of my pregnancies, not because I have low progesterone. There's no indications of that whatsoever. I just believe that it's supportive. So there are other things that I do as well that I just do because they're supportive. With my losses, and you're gonna hear more about my losses in this video, of course, is that they were abnormalities from the start. So all we can really do with that is to focus on egg and sperm quality, which we had already been doing, so we continued to do and looked into ways that we could do more of. None of my losses was a healthy embryo that terminated. Okay, I really want to get into more of the other things in this video, but there are like a lot of questions that I get that I feel the need to put that information out there. So before you come in the comments making lots of suggestions about, have you seen this specialist? Did you do that? Did you do all of these things? Yes, we did do all of those things, or most of them are the ones that were deemed relevant. We did see a specialist. We literally had a specialist gynecologist who cried because it just seemed so unreal. It seemed so unreal that two seemingly healthy people were having bad luck loss, that's kind of what they're deemed, one after the other. The third lost embryo was sent for testing, and the gynecologist was so sure that it was going to give us answers, and it came back as the most common random chromosome abnormality that causes first trimester losses. We also saw a genetic specialist who deemed that there was no reason for us to do further genetic testing because the chromosomal loss that we had is considered common and random, and if there was a chromosomal aspect to the losses, she said we would have had a different chromosomal loss. We wouldn't have had that. That one is called monosomy X, and from the specialists and experts that we saw, the best theory that they could come up with was that my uterus is not fussy enough, and it basically implants all of the fertilized eggs where somebody else may not have got pregnant that cycle. I kept getting pregnant really easily, where those were then defective from the start. The recommendation was to keep going until one sticks and one works. One of the first approach things for me with pregnancy after loss, but also just like one of my approaches to life in general, I don't think that when things are happening in our lives that we deserve them or that we should take blame for them, but I do believe that it is helpful for us to approach it with an empowered stance. So even though my losses were deemed bad luck or random, there's still a lot of ownership that I can take from that, just because it wasn't something that I did in the pregnancy. And yes, I was very healthy, and we did preconception for 3 years before trying to conceive, but I never went into the mindset of, I did these things, so therefore I deserve a healthy pregnancy, or went into a spiral of like, what's the point of being healthy if I did that and then this happened anyway. The way that I looked at it is that I need to take ownership. Maybe it was one of the stupid things I did to my body in my early 20s. Maybe it was something my husband did. Maybe it's something our parents did. We won't ever know, but we can still take ownership and say what we have right in front of us is that we need to continue to be our healthiest selves and do what is within our control, and not from a stressful sense, not from a blaming ourselves sense, from a sense of taking ownership of the journey that we are on. And I mostly share this because I know in the health realm, people can become very stressed about their health efforts, and there can be a fine line between taking responsibility and taking ownership and blaming ourselves or shaming ourselves, and then having a resistance to examining all of the factors that we may be able to address or do things about, because we don't want to go into that stress state or that like blaming ourselves state. But we are not victims to life. Yeah, by textbook there was nothing that we could do, but it didn't feel to me like there was nothing that we could do. It felt with every single loss. I remember my husband and I looking at ways that we could be healthier, we could be better. We saw it as giving ourselves more time to do more things to be our best self, and not just our health, but also who we were as a couple and our environment and other things. After one of the losses, I remember having a conversation with Ian where we were saying, well, this gives us more time to become the versions of ourselves that we really want to be when we're parents. And this is not a put a positive spin on something. This is not a denial of our experience and the pain and what we were going through. This was an active choice to take meaning out of something that was crappy. I firmly believe that we are healthier today than we were when we initially started trying to conceive. And I'm so happy about that, and it's a never-ending journey for us to continuously, in a non-stressed way, focus on being our best selves, because being healthy through every aspect of parenting is so valuable and so enriching to the experience in and of itself. That doesn't mean that being healthy means that we never experience difficulties. We do, and there are no guarantees in life, but they definitely, for me, came with way more rewards than the mindset of thinking, oh, because I was healthy, this was not supposed to happen to me. It did happen to me, and I never sought quick fixes. I never sought a magic bullet supplement or anything like that, because when it comes to this stuff, our overall health really matters in the long term, and it is helpful, in my opinion, to have a long-term view of how to be our best, healthiest selves. And I'll speak more about it in this video, but I do resonate with what was written in The Art of Living, where babies come when the conditions are right, and to trust them. So the balance always with all of these things is what is within our control, what are the things that we can do to be our healthiest, best selves, and then surrender and be at peace and be open to the mystery of life, and that things will unfold in ways that we cannot and should not always try to control. I remember one of the gynaes said to me, there are two things in life you can't control, and that's life and death. And I do believe that, but there's so much in the middle there that we can do to be empowered to life without falling victim to controlling as a coping mechanism. And that's probably gonna be a huge theme in this video. A huge lesson that I chose to take from my experience, and I speak of it this way as well, is because I think that when we experience difficulties and hardship, it serves us to choose to take lessons and gifts and meaning from that hardship. Otherwise, it's just painful, full stop. So I'm not saying that we experience something, that therefore we have to take some kind of lesson, or we're going through it because this is something that we have to learn or somehow deserve. That's not it for me. What it is for me is that I choose to take every meaning that I can and every opportunity given that I am experiencing this hardship, and this is something that I apply to every single hardship that I am faced with in my life, and I find it serves me really well to choose to do that. So the lesson that seemed so obvious to me on this journey was the lesson of learning to let go of my perceived control and start to really trust my baby. I always knew that I wanted to be the type of parent who lets my children be their own person and give them the space to be that, to grow and to blossom and to trust them. It starts with my approach to pregnancy. And I started to see this, but sometimes it takes us a while to really be able to learn the lesson, which is what it was for me. After my first loss, I did those cheap pregnancy tests where you kind of stick the lines in a book to watch the lines go darker, because my first loss was a chemical pregnancy. And then I thought, oh, because I'm seeing the lines get darker, I'm seeing the HCG go up, this gave me perceived control that I am doing this thing and seeing these results, therefore I won't be experiencing that again. So I watched the lines get darker, and then I had a spontaneous 6-week loss that came after some spotting, then cramps, then full-on bleeding. This was different from my chemical pregnancy, which was my first one, where I got my positive, the line got like slightly darker, and then my pregnancy test turned negative, and then 2 days later I only started bleeding. At the time, I needed to understand, and I felt like there had to be something. There had to be something that I could control, that I could know. So I had my uterine lining measured, and I appreciate the gynae who did it, because he was very gently trying to help me to see. He was the one that said you can only control life and death, that this was something that I needed to let go of. And he humored me and he measured my lining, but he made it very clear that he was only doing that because that's what I was asking of him, and that he did not think that that was a concern, and that these things just happen. My lining came back perfectly fine. In the next pregnancy, I still had the same similar approach where I was taking these pregnancy tests every single morning, and I would stick them in a little book and I would watch the lines get darker, and that would offer me, I don't want to say real reassurance because it's not real. It feels like reassurance-ish in the moment, but it didn't feel like wholesome reassurance. Anyway, the lines were nice and dark. They continue to stay dark, and at 8 weeks, I went for an ultrasound, and we saw a perfectly healthy, growing, on track embryo, and it felt like, okay, I got my reassurance. This is the one. It's going to be fine now. I experienced all the pregnancy symptoms, lots of fatigue. Right before 12 weeks, something felt off. Can't really explain exactly what felt off, but something felt off. And then the day before my 12-week ultrasound, I went to the bathroom and saw some brown spotting. Spotting? Okay. Okay. Which could be normal, it could be nothing, but it could also be something. Okay. And that's the thing with spotting and bleeding in pregnancy, is that for the most part, when you see it, it will probably be incredibly hard, because at the time I still sought answers outside of myself, and you're probably going to get around a 50-50 of whether it was okay for somebody else or not if they saw bleeding in pregnancy, because bleeding in pregnancy can be fine, but it can also not be fine. I went for the 12-week ultrasound the next day, and then very quickly on the screen saw that the embryo was no longer moving and it did not grow. The heartbeat that we saw at the 8-week ultrasound, I do apologize for all the sounds. The heartbeat that we saw at the 8-week ultrasound had stopped 4 days later. Although I was quite opposed to it, I did allow myself to be rushed to hospital for a D&C, only in the name of the gynae being very adamant that we needed answers and that this was the best way to make sure that she got the embryo for testing. Anyway, this was the one that came back as completely random chromosomal abnormality, very common, no specific genetic factors linked to either one of us. And this was finally where I was really, even though I had already understood that part of this journey for me may be learning to let go of illusions of control. And I'm going to call them that because they are illusions of control. They are things that we do because we think that in the moment they're going to take our discomfort away or make us feel better or tell us that it's going to be okay. Where the truth is, they don't give us a sustained sense of being at peace. And they're illusions of control because as you're hearing from my journey, those things, they can go textbook and then suddenly not. I was really starting to understand that I needed to really embody being at peace to the mystery of life and trusting my baby. And I remember the genetic counselor that we saw, same with the gynecologist, they wanted to offer anything that could be helpful. So the genetic counselor said that she would write a letter to our insurance for us to do the NIPT test, like as soon as you can possibly do it, to give us reassurance and just help us to feel more at peace. That test does not prevent anything. There is nothing on that test that is going to result in anything that we can change or do to save the pregnancy. So the offer was purely from a perspective of trying to offer something to us that would make the journey less difficult, I guess. And I immediately knew that I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't need more. I don't need more tests. I don't need more illusions of it's going to be okay and to hang on to those things as my way to cope through this difficulty. Because I'd had it. I had a positive pregnancy test that turned negative. I had HCG that doubled and went up the way that it's supposed to and all the things, and then still had a spontaneous 6-week loss. I had a perfect ultrasound. Literally, growth was perfect. There was no indication of anything wrong, only for that embryo to stop growing and cease 4 days later. So what I'd experienced was 3 losses that happened at completely different times, except that they were all in the first trimester, in different ways, after getting confirmation from some kind of test that it was okay for it not to work out. And it felt clear to me that what I needed to be okay was to learn to sit with the extreme discomfort of not knowing and of uncertainty. And I continue to say that those things are illusions of control, or we do them for a perceived feeling of reassurance, when the reality is those things do not tell you if your pregnancy is going to be okay. They don't tell you if you're going to have a healthy baby or not. They give you some information, and we have a tendency to attach to that quite hard, when the reality of bringing life into the world is that you can have a perfect test and the next day. I don't say that to scare anybody, but it is the reality of pregnancy. It's the reality of bringing life into this world. I read a lot of books on this topic, on pregnancy, on loss, miscarriages, you name it. I've read a lot on this topic. And I can't remember what book it is in, sadly, so I can't credit it. But there was one that I read, and I think they did a study where they looked at women who went for ultrasounds for reassurance, and they measured their stress levels before they went, then when they went or right afterwards, and then their stress levels, like say a week or so later. And what they found was there was like a certain level of stress that would go up a lot right before an ultrasound, get the ultrasound, see that things are okay, feel some kind of reassurance, stress level may go down for a day or 2, and then went back up to the same that it was before the time, and then spike again before the next ultrasound. So essentially they were getting this huge relief for a little bit of time, but in general, they were not in a state of less stress and more reassurance in general, and they were reliant on the ultrasounds for that relief, but then the stress would spike directly before the time, thus being higher than if they were not doing those ultrasounds. And the thing is, I get it. When we're going through this stuff, we so badly want something to tell us that it is going to be okay. But those tests don't tell us that. They give us a snapshot. They give us a statistic. And I was the less than 1% statistic more than once. But also for people that aren't, I think it's worthwhile really asking whether those tests are giving a sustained sense of peace, or at least less stress, or are they just a band-aid that gives a little bit of relief from the extreme discomfort of not knowing, and then that comes back again, and there needs to then be more tests or more things that are done to help to get through it. That's what I took from my journey. I didn't want to be relying on tests because it's this volatile, emotional roller coaster where we think that it's providing us with some kind of reassurance. And maybe for some it is. Maybe sometimes, I mean, if the tests always come back perfect, then it does. But if they come back like a little bit, could be this, it could be that, we spiral. We're Googling all our symptoms, spending hours on online forums. We're looking for answers outside of us to cope with the extreme hardship of not knowing, of the possibility that we might go through something that's really painful. And I mean, from a psychological perspective, we understand that it's easier for human beings to do something, anything, than to sit and do nothing, make nothing the conscious choice, and just be with not knowing. There's studies on this where someone would literally rather make a choice or behaviors, okay, that can have a worse impact on the outcome, because that at least still feels like they're doing something, versus how hard it is to choose to do nothing. And that's what I was finally really learning to embody, which I knew theoretically, but I was finally starting to embody in my 4th pregnancy, where I didn't do any tests. No early pregnancy test at, I think it was 5 weeks. I did a test purely to have something to show on Instagram, but I didn't do it to know that I was pregnant. I knew that I was pregnant. I have videos on my channel around how I know that I was pregnant and don't need to rely on a pregnancy test for that. So I did that purely to have something to show, and that was the only test that I did. And I sat with, this is going to unfold how it unfolds. No more, no blood tests, no watching the lines go up, no early ultrasounds. We're going to just let this one play out. And I'm going to start to learn to sit with not knowing and the hardship of wondering whether I'm going to go through that pain again. And I think it's in The Alchemist part where he speaks about our worrying about future suffering. I think I'm combining The Alchemist now with some other book on Brené Brown, but where if something bad is going to come, when we're worrying about, thank you, lovey.
Eat them.
Okay. When we're worrying
and this one.
and stressing and almost like preparing ourselves for the worst.
Thank you so much.
Sure, lovey. We steal the joy and what is now. And Brené Brown, yes, she did a study on this, which was about parents who lost children and whether preempting it or worrying about it helps you, and it does not. It only took away from the experience that you were having in that moment. And in The Alchemist, he says, if you are going to end up suffering, but you're worrying about it on the way there, then you're suffering twice. And these are things that I try to keep in mind, is that we can be realistic that hard things happen without stealing our joy in the now if it isn't going to happen, or suffering twice if it is going to happen. So in my 4th pregnancy, things seemed to progress and go on. I mean, I wasn't doing any tests, so I was just waiting. And then by week 8, all my pregnancy symptoms disappeared. And if you go on forums, you will know that this could be normal and it could be not. But this time I chose not to do that. I chose not to go into Google spirals, spend hours on forums trying to look for answers, and just accept that I don't know what will happen. And I'm just going to be with what might happen. And the thing is, I get it. I did in previous pregnancies spend hours on forums just looking for other success stories to tell me that it was going to be okay. But I had to be honest that those are just coping mechanisms, and they detract from me living my life and being just present with what is my experience. So for a week long, I didn't know what would happen, but I knew that something felt off. And then I started to experience some bleeding. So I messaged a sonographer. I literally said to her, I know this pregnancy is not viable, but I just want her to check that it's not a risk to me. Now, I was not particularly worried about ectopic pregnancies, and that's not from a naive standpoint. As someone who's experienced a lot of losses, I've read the stories, I've read up a lot about different types of losses, but before I didn't have any risk factors for an ectopic pregnancy, and I also knew what to look out for with them, especially when I opted to miscarry at home. I knew what to look out for in terms of when should I go to the hospital or anything like that. But with this one, I wanted to rule that out explicitly because I had read that the risk of an ectopic pregnancy increases after you've had any kind of uterine procedure. And my third loss, I had the D&C. So I just wanted to go rule that out. The sonographer, she was really kind. She had unfortunately been the bearer of bad news for us already. She so badly wanted it to be viable. But we immediately saw on the screen that it was an empty sac, measuring at 6 weeks, no embryo inside. So a blighted ovum. She offered things like, maybe your dates are off, maybe it's just a little bit too early, maybe this, maybe that. And I appreciated that, but no. I knew my dates, I knew my ovulation, I knew everything. I knew with 110% certainty what we were seeing on that screen. I went home to kind of wait for the miscarriage to spontaneously start. I had already had an appointment booked with the gynecologist for in a few days, so I just kind of kept that appointment there. And then I had like a lot of bleeding, but it was different. There was no pain. I mean, at that point, I was on loss number 4, so I knew what a miscarriage feels like. There was so much blood, but no pain whatsoever. And there was something that exited my body, and I also knew that this was not the same as the other times, but nonetheless kept it and took it to the gynecologist to show. And when I was there, she did an ultrasound as well and saw that all of that bleeding was not related to the miscarriage at all. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but essentially what that was a subcolonic hematoma. And this is why I say this stuff. Bleeding in pregnancy could be normal, could be fine, and it could be not. That was a lot of blood, which if it had happened to somebody who had a healthy growing embryo, that would not have been an indication of loss, because subcolonic hematomas, it's the dishwasher, happen and are most of the time not a risk to the pregnancy. Anyway, we saw on the screen that the miscarriage had not yet started. There was no indication as to when it would start, given that that bleeding was separate from the miscarriage of itself. So again, she offered me the pills that sort of help a miscarriage move along, as well as if I wanted a D&C again as well. This was a hard no for me, like a very hard no for me. I seriously regretted the D&C. Of my 1 out of my 4 pregnancy losses, the D&C was the only one where the bleeding afterwards and the pain that I experienced afterwards was truly like unbearable, and I thought that I would not be able to make it. At some point I thought I was going to pass out from the pain because it was just so severe and different. So I went home and I was willing to wait as long as I needed to wait for my body to process this loss on its own. And that's one of the ways that I approach pregnancy and loss that may be quite different to a lot of people, is that often people refer to miscarriages as the body didn't recognize the loss, the body didn't terminate the pregnancy. But that's not entirely accurate. The body has not yet done it. In most cases, the body will terminate it without any risk to the person. Of course, there is a small chance of risk with all of these things, but the risk is, one, very small, and also the way that you approach that risk. This is an individual decision for people to make, but taking the meds or doing a D&C, they come with risks. More risks, in my opinion, from my reading, than if we waited out. I did that D&C in the name of getting answers, but also because I was rushed, I wasn't thinking straight, and I honestly wish that I had more time to make that decision, because I was convinced by the gynecologist in that moment that this is the way that we need to collect the embryo and that I wouldn't be able to do it myself for testing, and that's too big a risk. Where, given the way that my 2 previous losses have gone, I should have been more confident in my ability to be able to collect that embryo, or even take the risk that maybe I wouldn't be able to for testing. So I do regret doing the D&C. I regret the risks that come with doing a D&C. I never did it to be over and done with. I did it purely for that. And even though the risks are minimal, especially the way that it was done for me, it still does carry risks. And I felt like I had enough hardships on my journey to our baby, and that I didn't really need to be adding any more to that. Now, the reason I share that is because that in part also solidified for me why I don't want to do any first trimester ultrasounds. Because a lot of the time why somebody would opt for meds or for a D&C is because of how truly uncomfortable it is when you have seen that a pregnancy is not viable and you're waiting. My decision not to do first trimester ultrasounds was in part because, one, they don't offer real reassurance in the sense of if everything is okay, whether it's still going to be okay later. The other one, if it shows that it's not okay, given that I don't want to take any of the meds or the procedures, I would just have to wait it out for what could be weeks. If you look at mine, for example, the 3rd one was not viable from 8 weeks and 4 days, but only started to terminate with some spotting around 12 weeks. And the 4th one was not viable already from 6 weeks, probably even before that. And that one only terminated by 9 weeks. And then the other reason that solidified for me why I wouldn't want to do an early ultrasound is because there's nothing that they can see on an ultrasound that can save a pregnancy. There's no choice that you can make in that first trimester based off of an ultrasound that is going to help to save that pregnancy. Now, I have seen online some people say that you have to go for an ultrasound. In their case, it saved it because then they need to take thyroid meds or they need to take progesterone. You don't see that from an ultrasound. The ultrasounds don't show you those things. Those are things that you can pick up from other symptoms that you're having or from blood tests, not from an ultrasound. Those are also things that I had ruled out from my cycle and didn't need to test. I could tell my metabolic health from tracking my cycle. I could tell my hormonal health from tracking my cycle. So those were not things that I looked into doing. If I had concerns about my thyroid levels or my hormone levels, then I would go for the appropriate test for that. But an ultrasound is not the test that gives you that information. And for some, they may say, but you need to go for the risk of an ectopic pregnancy. Things I just want to say with the fear of ectopic pregnancies is that it isn't medically necessary to do a whole lot of testing because of every risk that exists. It isn't a recommendation for a healthy individual to go for an early ultrasound to rule that out. So in many countries, lots of doctors recommend that somebody only go the earliest to 12 weeks, but often only at 20 weeks for their first ultrasound. So while that is a very unusual decision maybe in the pregnancy after loss sphere, it's not a generally unusual decision. Anyway, I decided, even with the fourth one, I only went because I already figured that the pregnancy wasn't viable. And I knew that there was no reassurance that I was going to get from an ultrasound. And if anything, it was just going to stress me out to go. And then even if I saw perfectly healthy growing embryo, that wouldn't mean for me that I was going to have a healthy baby. And if I didn't see that, I would be left with the thing of just waiting it out, which is, in my opinion, easier to do when you haven't seen that. So someone asked me this, whether with my experience, I find it easier to have my body tell me that I'm going to have a loss or a test. Hands down, my body. To go through it with a more trusting my body and just letting things play out and using our medical advancements for things that really can save or make a difference versus doing them where we really complicate something that women have been going through for a really, really, really long time. And I do believe that in my experience, I don't know about other people, that it was more peaceful to let my body tell me. It's the same with knowing that I was pregnant. I let my body tell me by my cycle and by missing my period, rather than seeing it on a test. And I don't really have the words for it, but it feels more whole. I don't quite have the word for it. I wish I did. And moving on from this, by my 5th pregnancy, now remember, this was my 5th pregnancy in a 12-month period, I was so tired of having losses. Then the universe, or whatever language you prefer to use there, threw me the biggest gift in the form of the hardest lesson that I have ever experienced in my whole life. And that is, in my 5th pregnancy, I started spotting at week 5. And I had spotting on and off for about 4 weeks. It was light, it was very light, but it was very clearly there. This was unimaginably hard, and I was faced with everything that I had experienced before and decided in terms of how I wanted my approach to pregnancy to go and what I wanted to take from it. So I did no pregnancy test, no blood test, no checking, no ultrasounds. And I watched my mind so badly try to protect me from pain and oscillate between everything's gonna be fine and no, we just need confirmation that it's not, so that we don't have to live in this extreme discomfort of not knowing and just waiting and seeing. I didn't Google any symptoms. I didn't do anything other than watch my mind go to coping mechanisms and control patterns that were learned behaviors that at some point in my life I'm sure served me well, but they didn't serve me anymore. And that what I needed to take from this was to learn to be afraid and to not know and to sit with uncertainty and let it play out. So whenever the thoughts would come up of just, and you'll hear this a lot from people who've had a loss before, where they just need to know if it's not going to be viable. But that's, for me, very similar to just needing to know if it is going to be okay. Because the reality is it's so hard to not know. But the truth is, when we bring life into this world, we don't know. We don't know if it's going to be okay or not. And it serves us. I really believe it serves us to learn to sit with not knowing and to be able to sit with fear and uncertainty. I didn't numb. I watched myself try to. Many times I would find myself going into a fear spiral when I just pick up my phone and scroll mindlessly, or try to watch some mindless series just so that I wouldn't have to be with my thoughts, and I would gently stop myself from doing those things. Acknowledge that it was hard, but that I can do hard. And if I am to experience another loss, I can do it. Will it be awful and painful? Yeah. It was every other time. No amount of anticipation or trying to control things made it any less hard. It was always hard. My fourth loss was actually the least hard of all of my losses, and that was the only one where I wasn't spending hours on forums and trying to control factors or look for certainty. And even though it was the fourth one, it somehow was the least painful one. And it was definitely not because I had somehow gotten used to having losses. They are emotionally painful, no matter how many of them you've done. They are also physically incredibly painful. So, wasn't that a million times a day, it felt like, where I had to thank my mind for trying all its coping mechanisms and then tell it to stand down and just be. Just be. Not just with the possibility of grieving again, but the fears that I had come up around whether I would ever get to experience feeling my baby grow in my belly, experience birth, breastfeeding, all of those things that I so badly wanted to experience. To face those fears and acknowledge that they were so important to me, and it's beautiful, but I'm afraid of that I might not have that experience. But to just be with that and be at peace to the mystery of life. There's a part in the book by Thich Nhat Hanh, The Art of Living, where he speaks about these flowers that were there and then he sort of came there again and they weren't there. What he reflected on with this experience was his mother had had a miscarriage before him, and he wondered, was that my brother or was that me? And then he continues to talk about how babies come when the conditions are right, and that it is important that we respect that, and through that respect it will save us a lot of grief. I hadn't read that book yet in my first few losses, and when I did read it, it resonated so much with me, because although I couldn't explain it before, with every loss I experienced, I didn't feel like I had lost an individual baby. This is not a thing about when life starts. Life starts even before conception. It's a thing about whether that life was an individual baby. And the experiences I had, I can't tell you why, but not once did it feel like that to me. It felt like, not yet, not now. It felt like how he'd explained it in the book. A baby that kind of started to come, but decided that the time and the conditions weren't right and retracted. That's how it felt. And reading that in a book was so meaningful for me because it was so different from everything that I was hearing in the lost realm. But it was so true for the experience that I'd been having that I can't explain to you why that's what it felt like to me, but that is what it felt like to me. So when I was experiencing my 5th pregnancy, all I could do was continue to say, I trust that our baby will come to us when the conditions are right. Even if I don't understand that right now, and even if it's really, really hard right now, and if I can't see the bigger picture, this is my road to trusting our baby. So I don't, and I never did, do the thing where I held on to due dates. I can't even tell you when those pregnancies were due. There isn't a kind of ritual or celebration of life or anything for those individual ones, which to some people may bring them a lot of meaning, but it didn't for me. And in saying that, my grief, my pain, my experience was not any less because of it. I didn't feel like I needed to have these symbolic gestures to truly acknowledge the experience and the pain that I went through. Nor did I need anybody else to validate my experience. It didn't bother me when I had a friend say to me, you know, those first two don't really count anyway. It didn't bother me. They counted to me, they were real to me. And I didn't need them to be considered real by anybody else's standards for it to be real for me. I didn't need people using specific language or wording or anything, because my experience was mine. And I knew what I felt, and I could be with my grief, and I wasn't looking outside of myself for validation of my experience or my grief or my pain. And I knew how uncomfortable it was for other people, and often people don't know what to say, and they try to say the only thing that comes to mind, and they hope that it helps. So I could be present with all of that, and I'm really grateful that I could. So the mantra that I held on to was that our baby will come when the conditions are right. And then I'm trusting that. Weeks felt like years, but eventually I saw my uterus grow for the first time. And then I was presenting a workshop to like 30 or something people. And I felt movement for the first time. I knew without a doubt what it was. I mean, I was literally busy with a presentation to 30 people. I was very distracted, and still it was so obvious. And this is a moment that I will probably never be able to verbally do justice to, but it's something I wish that people knew. And that is because I didn't do any tests and I didn't do any ultrasounds. That moment brought me so much joy, immense joy. And it wasn't about the future or what it meant or reassurance or anything like that. It was just pure joy that far exceeded every little bit of pain and hardship that I had endured. To feel that, not to see it, not to see on a screen, not to do things just for reassurance, but to be present, to have been present for weeks, just trusting. And then to feel that and feel so connected to our baby. And again, not projecting it onto the future of what this may mean for future, but just to have that experience. So I still hadn't gone for any tests, and we moved countries when I was 20 weeks pregnant, and I had to like apply for a health card here in Canada and apply for a midwife to assist with a home birth. And then I went to a midwife appointment for the first time when I was 25 weeks, and she offered to do a Doppler test, which for the most part I would usually say no to. Like, I've not done any Doppler tests in this pregnancy, but I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't now avoiding tests out of fear, because as much as I have my convictions, I'll call them that, about early ultrasounds, first trimester ultrasounds, that I don't extend that to later ultrasounds. There are things in later ultrasounds that can have an impact on the outcome and the choices that we make. So I also needed to check myself now that I wasn't entirely swinging to the opposite end of the spectrum of where I started. So I did do the Doppler just to face that fear of how many times I had heard, "I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat," or "I'm so sorry that you're going through this." because I didn't want to make fear-based decisions in my pregnancy. I wanted to make decisions based off of our values and a proper risk analysis, not from a fear-based space. Anyway, I did my first ultrasound with Alba at 32 weeks for a placenta location for home birth, and Alba was born at 40 weeks and 6 days, which again tested my surrendering and trusting our baby, because I did get a lot of things about declining induction because I had gone past 40 weeks. No, I didn't do anything, even the so-called natural things to try bring it along. Just waited every day. Is today the day? Not today, etc. So trusting our baby will come in their own time. And I say this, I feel like I have to really say a lot of disclaimers in this video. I say this not to say that I would have continued to decline induction, but I knew definitely that around 40 weeks, I was not interested in any kind of induction methods. So this is not about what I would have done later on in the pregnancy, if we had gotten that far. Anyway, Alba was born really fast. We're intense. Afterwards, I remember saying, feels like I've been pregnant for 2 years, and the midwife and other midwife and doula laughed. And Ian was like, no, you know, for me, it really has been. I was really, really happy that I was finally holding my baby after everything that I had been through. And I can say with a lot of certainty that that moment was more meaningful because of the choices that I had made on my journey to Alba. And I can also say without a doubt that I have been a better parent and more embodied the type of parent that I wanted to be because of the hardship that I faced and how I then chose to face that hardship and what I chose to take from our hardship. Now, I don't think that people need to go through hardship to make them good parents. Of course, I don't think that. But sometimes Ian and I say that our journey was not the one that we wanted. It's definitely not what we wished for, but it kind of felt like what we needed. We still like to joke that Alba wanted to be Canadian because her pregnancy was the only one that didn't delay our immigration. Anyway, fast forward to where we are now and to deciding to try to conceive again. We always planned on spacing children like 3 to 5 years, 3 being the minimum. So I had lots of time not to think about it and just be with my baby and my toddler. And actually this is something I've spoken to another friend who had a later loss, where a lot of the time things that are hard in parenting we experience with a lot of gratitude and not that much focus on the hard, and very clearly because of what we went through. Anyway, we finally decided that the time felt right at a minimum. Of course, we know that it's not like, okay, now this means baby will come, but we felt like we were healthy, even though I was still breastfeeding, my cycle was good, I was tracking it, all of the things, and we decided to embark on this journey again. I'm not gonna lie. Honestly, I did have thoughts come up around stuff like, how many losses will I have to go through this time? How many times will I do the first trimester this time? And I didn't shame myself for having those thoughts because, I mean, look at the journey that I had to Alba. But I also didn't allow myself to go live in those thought spirals. Anyway, this time I actually decided to go even more natural. And even though I'm very big on tracking my cycle, I literally co-created a course where I'm the part about how to track your cycle. I've got loads of videos on my channel on how to track your cycle. I'm really big on that. I decided the first trying to conceive cycle already that I really wanted to just be even more natural and wait and see kind of approach to things. So I stopped taking my basal body's temperature and I only took note, mental note, and then later on filled it in on my chart for dating purposes when I ovulated based off of cervical fluid alone. And then I waited to see if my period would come, and it did not come. and it still has not come. Here we are, 19 weeks later. I have done no tests. What I did do differently this time, because you can watch my birth story, I wasn't well aligned with my previous midwife, but there was not much that I could do given midwife shortage and so forth. So I really wanted a midwife that was more aligned, and because of the shortage and how quickly they fill up, I needed to reach out to her, like basically essentially when I missed my period. So I have had midwife appointments, but with a lot of respect, the midwife, there has been no testing done, there has been no Doppler done, there has been no any of that. I wanted again to just wait to feel my uterus grow. I've actually become really good at like checking that, and also to just wait to feel my baby. And wonderfully I did, a little bit earlier than Alba, around like just shy of 16 weeks, I think. And the movement has gotten stronger and so forth, and that's really beautiful for me to connect in that way before any testing, if I so choose to do testing. And any testing I do is purely based on whether it will inform certain decisions. So again, I do think that I will go for an ultrasound. I appreciated you don't need an ultrasound for this at all, and I do understand lots of people choose not to do any ultrasounds, and that's wonderful. I did appreciate just the placenta location, like a basic check, so I will do that again, but this time I won't wait so long to do it, because doing it at 32 weeks got a lot of backlash in the sense of like, we can barely see anything because you're so super pregnant, and it actually caused a lot more inaccuracies, which was a bit frustrating. So this time I'll probably go around 25 weeks. If I do an ultrasound, you can stay tuned, I will share that, but I think I do, given the choice for home birth and all of that. But yeah, it is not easy for me. Pregnancy after my experience is hard. It takes a lot of surrendering, a lot of really checking in with what feels like wholesome, good behaviors versus just coping mechanisms. And I don't want to go through my life having my behaviors be coping mechanisms. I want to be present with life. I want to fully experience life and everything that comes with it. And I don't want to live my life in fear of the what ifs constantly, or almost stealing my joy because of the fear of pain. Because pain and suffering and hardship is a part of life, sadly. And to have the full experience of life, I want to be open to how things will unfold. Continue to check myself where I'm taking an empowered approach to what I can, control what matters, and then also still being open to life, surrendering to life's mysteries, and letting go when it does not serve me to try so hard to control things. And maybe clear from this video, I read a lot. I've read a lot of things, not just related to facts about pregnancy and loss and all of that stuff, but like approaches to life. I have a video on my channel about books that changed my life, and a few of them were really truly significant on my road to baby or babies that we will be having and parenting, especially Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson. Really challenged my view on our use of medical interventions and when they are used, when they're not, for life-saving purposes. Also took a lot from Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search for Meaning and Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything, in terms of my approach to suffering and to pain and to grief. And I cited it earlier, The Art of Living by Thich Nhat Hanh. That one's a bit of more of a, I want to say like a woohoo kind of book, so that one, maybe watch my video on books that changed my life and you can decide if you want to read any of these. But one of the books that I didn't mention in that video, because it's only applicable really to pregnancy, I think is, there's a book called The Myth of the Perfect Pregnancy. I have my website linked down below where I have a bunch of lists of books that I recommend before pregnancy, during pregnancy, parenting, etc. The Myth of the Perfect Pregnancy, in my opinion, is not a well-written book. Like I wish that it was written in a better way, but it isn't. But the content of the book is very unique and very important. But it really puts into perspective how human beings used to approach pregnancy and birth and all of those things, and how that has changed. Not just with the changes in what is medically possible, but with the changes in marketing and advertising and politics, debates around when does life start and all of those things. And the book is not to sway anybody in any kind of direction, but it really puts into perspective where we can start to see where some of our ideas around pregnancy have come from, unfortunately, really good marketing, which was like really sad for me to read, because the marketing people realized that women are the best buyers, and the earlier they could get to women, the more they could sell things to women. Anyway, there's a lot in that book around how we came to be in our current space, of where a lot of it is when we get a positive pregnancy test, the expectation is we will then have a baby, where the reality is a lot of the time that is not what happens. And women used to be a bit more real about the vulnerability of pregnancy without trying to take away from that and having that experience. So that book was really insightful for me after my losses, and even if I hadn't had any losses, I think it's a book worth reading, especially if we're in the mindset of wanting to live life that feels authentic to us, and maybe a less materialistic one, because it really shows us like how much stuff on the road to parenting and babies we buy and do that may be more meaningful not to do. I'm gonna say a final thing. Sorry, this video has been very long. I am still amidst pregnancy after loss. Yes, I have Elba and I'm so grateful for that, but it doesn't mean that I'm somehow cured of everything that goes with pregnancy after loss. A lot of my decisions, approaches, and things are still very intentional and very conscious, and I'm still surrendering and open to how this journey will play out and what the decisions are that I want to make along the road. So you can stay tuned for that. I will share more in this pregnancy than I did with Elba throughout the pregnancy, and that's because I'm not busy moving countries, so I have the capacity to do so. I want to say, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you for being here. And I don't know where you are in your journey, but I do know that when we're in the throes of it, it's really hard to see the bigger picture or to see how things will eventually unfold, or to trust that even when we're going through hardship, there is a lot of beauty that can come from a journey that is not the one that you planned, it's not the one that you wanted, and it is one filled with a lot of pain and a lot more hardship than feels okay to endure. There's still so much beauty that can come from that. And I truly believe that the point of life is not to avoid suffering, it's not to avoid grief. Grief and suffering are part of life. They're unfortunately inevitable. So the point of life is to live it fully, with all of its highs and all of its lows. And I had them. And I will probably still have some other version of it. But I was there, alone, on my bathroom floor, in so much pain, bleeding in the middle of the night, to then have the experience of sitting on our carpeted stairs where Elba was born, holding her, having also experienced immense physical pain, but experiencing more joy than I had ever felt in my entire life. So I don't know where you are in your journey, but I hope that seeing Elba or hearing my story gives you something of meaning. And it's not just hope of a baby, a healthy baby, but my hope is that whatever hardship that you endure has meaning for you, and that it's not just hardship. There isn't a day that goes by that I am not in total awe and grateful for what I get to experience now because of what I went through. And I get that on this journey it's easy to feel bitter and angry, and there's nothing wrong with feeling those things. But I do think it serves us not to live in that state, to go through the process of taking meaning from our suffering and seeing the beauty that has come from our suffering, and not in a denial of the hardship kind of way. You're hungry? And I'm gonna end up with the last thing. Yeah, I remember, I think it was after my second loss, or even after my first loss, someone I went to school with, I hadn't spoken to her in years, since high school, which was like 10 years before that. And she messaged me and said, look, I'm really, really sorry what you're going through. It's really hard and all that, but please don't let this become your entire personality. And at the time, I didn't quite understand that. It's like, sure, but I get it now. And I get that for some people, it really serves them to, the meaning that they maybe make out of this is to attend the support groups, or maybe an entire Instagram, or maybe an entire social media dedicated to loss. And I trust that that's helpful for them on their journey. But for me, my losses are part of my story. They are not my story. And there are things that I'm completely fine casually discussing. Sometimes I get a lot of times I get questions like, why would you move countries 5 months pregnant? And then I explain, well, you know, we had a bunch of losses, and that's sort of how it just worked out with immigration, and that's what we did. And it's part of my experience. My pregnancy now, it's part of my experience, but it is not my whole story. I have also never once needed any other person to validate my experience. I don't need people to talk about my losses. I don't need them to acknowledge it. I don't need them to worry about saying the right thing. I had friends say things like, are you sure you even want kids? Pointing at their kids doing something rambunctious, which obviously is not the most tactful thing to say to somebody going through a loss, but it didn't bother me. So I get it. It was maybe hard for her. She didn't know what to say in that moment, so she said the first thing that came to her mind. And the reason that I can be present with whatever somebody else says about my experience is because my hardship was mine. It was my experience. It's my grief. Like, I can be present with how somebody else experiences my experience without needing validation for it. I never wanted people in my life to be afraid of what to say to me for fear that they may say the wrong thing. I do strongly believe in a world of being so afraid of offending people or saying the wrong thing that people end up saying nothing. Or they say superficial things, and we have a meaningless, superficial conversation, where I would much rather have a very real, connected conversation. And I don't want people to be afraid to talk to me about my experience for fear that they may say the wrong thing. I am responsible for my experience and how I feel and what I go through. And if I ever needed empathy, I will ask for it. But it's not a default expectation for me that if I share my journey, somebody needs to know how to hold an empathetic space for me. Sometimes I think when we grieve or we go through hardship, we can sometimes become a little bit unrealistic about our expectations of other people and their ability to hold space for that hardship or know what we need. They're human too. They're having their experience too. It's not a competition about who is having a harder experience. It's simply, how do we connect to other people and take ownership of our own grief and our own experience and ask of other people what we need in a language that makes it possible for them to give, but also for them to not give if they're not in that space to give. I started this video with my big disclaimer about how people experience losses and pregnancy after loss differently. And I think this is so true, yet there also seems to be this assumption that other people need to know what to say or how to support us when what we want, it may not be the same. And I think that it is beautiful if we let other people know what we find supportive or what we may appreciate if they do, but not in a way that expects that of them, because whenever we go through hardship, Our hardship's always going to be our own. It's our responsibility to grieve and to go through that. And whatever company we have on that journey is something to be appreciated, not so much something to be expected, in my opinion. That's something, or at least that's something that's been really meaningful for me on this journey. And with any of my hardship, really. So just know that somebody else's experience, questions, things they say, does not diminish our experience in any way. And I'll end this video with, wherever you are, my heart is with you. I know what it feels like to have a lot of hardship, a lot of fear, not a whole lot of hope, a lot of uncertainty. But I also know what it feels like to have a lot of joy and a lot of meaning and a lot of beauty. And I hope that that part offers something of value. Now let's see how this journey goes. So you can stay tuned for that. Thanks for being here with me today.